inviting me. Thanks for being here. So again, I'm a child psychiatrist and an addiction psychiatrist, and I'm the medical director for an adolescent substance treatment program here in Denver. And I kind of feel like I'm the token party pooper here, but okay, I guess that's my job. So let's see here. I think the problem is that there's no clear answer right now to whether or not there's more harm or benefit. The problem with medical research is that it takes a long time to conduct. You got to apply for your grants, get your grants, do the research, and then it takes probably 5 years before we'll have hard data on the true impact of medical marijuana here in the state. And by then we will have had to make policy decisions. So I'll try to go through briefly what we do know so far, and then a lot is still really up in the air here. In terms of good, we know that there are a small number of people who do benefit from the medical use of marijuana for their debilitating or terminal conditions. And the Institute of Medicine, in their 1999 report on marijuana as medicine, does allow for the compassionate use of marijuana for certain people. We know that medical marijuana has produced jobs and brought in tax dollars as well, which is a good thing. According to the Office of National Drug Control Policy, tobacco tax and alcohol tax pay for about 10% of the actual social cost of tobacco and alcohol use. So tobacco is the single leading cause of death in the U.S., and it has been for a long time. And alcohol is the third leading cause of death in the United States, and has been for a while. We also know that medical marijuana has spurred research into cannabinoids and the active ingredients of marijuana and what might be helpful. And indeed, there is a medicine called Sativex that is currently undergoing phase 3 trials in the United States, and hopefully will be available shortly. It's already available in Canada and various countries in Europe, and it's an oral spray of THC and cannabidiol, 2 of the active ingredients in marijuana. So stay tuned with that, and I think when that does become available, that hopefully will change dramatically our Colorado system of medical marijuana. In terms of moving on to harm here, we definitely know that marijuana has quite a side effect profile. It is clearly addictive. 1 in 6 adolescents who tries marijuana develops a clinical diagnosis of marijuana abuse or dependence. About 1 in 9 adults who tries it develops a diagnosis of marijuana abuse or dependence. We know that for teens it's clearly associated with school failure, school dropout, clearly associated with aggression. People always stop me on that one, but yes, there's no doubt about it scientifically that marijuana is both psychologically and physically dependent, and especially in the withdrawal state of marijuana, patients frequently have a lot of irritability, restlessness, and that's associated with aggression. It's especially, we know that half of new marijuana users are under the age of 24. We know the average age of onset of marijuana use is about 17. So we know that youth are disproportionately affected by marijuana use. And we know that youth also have a developing brain, and using marijuana during adolescence is toxic to the developing brain. Okay? New research, it would be highly unethical to do the definitive study of giving half of our youth placebo and half marijuana and following them over time and seeing who develops what long-term outcome, right? But as best as we can tell from the 1980s, we've had multiple studies showing that marijuana use as an adolescent is a risk factor for developing psychosis in adulthood, about doubles to quadruples one's risk of developing psychosis. Also has long-term impairment in terms of cognition and verbal memory. Yeah, Mr. Corey's saying here, somebody's psychotic. Well, nobody is...
Sure looks psychotic, doesn't it?
It just doubles to quadruples one's risk of becoming psychotic. Let's see here. Moving on, we know that in terms of hard data, teen expulsions for drug use in the state of Colorado increased by 40% in 1 year when we had this big boom of the medical marijuana industry in 2009. We know that teens are having easy access to medical marijuana. Our own research among teens in substance treatment shows that about 80% are getting their marijuana from somebody with a medical marijuana license. On top of that, those who do get their marijuana from somebody with a marijuana license report easier availability of marijuana. They report more positive peer reactions to marijuana use. They report more frequent marijuana use. They report more substance-related problems and more general health and mental health problems. In primary care settings, we've also surveyed teens who are presenting for primary care, showing about 10% of those teens report getting marijuana at some time in their life from somebody with a medical marijuana license. We know that substance treatment referrals for teens, okay, so 95% of teens at Denver Health in the substance treatment program present for marijuana use. And we know that our referrals have tripled since 2009. So actually, medical marijuana is a good thing in terms of the business. It's actually increasing business for substance treatment referrals. And we know that overall, marijuana is second behind alcohol in terms of reason for substance treatment for referrals. At about 25% of people who are in substance treatment are in treatment for their marijuana use disorder. One thing that definitely concerns me is advertising towards youth. So you hear, it's kind of like, reminds me of big tobacco all over again. We have advertisements for marijuana on hip-hop radio station. You see advertisements for medical marijuana that are very youth-oriented, and that's definitely concerning. We know from the story of tobacco that youth are more susceptible to the effects of advertising than adults. And so for an adolescent, having heavy exposure to tobacco advertising is a bigger risk factor for starting to smoke than actually having somebody in your home who smokes. In terms of other people that are affected, patients, medical marijuana patients, I've had a number of patients who have clear contraindications to medical marijuana, and yet they have their medical marijuana license. So these are people with already having addiction, psychosis, bipolar disorder, and they've gotten their medical marijuana license. Let's see here, in terms of, I think we'll still need to wait. So marijuana use clearly associated with accidents. We know it impairs driving. And we know from surveys, especially in Canada, that a lot of people drive under the influence of marijuana. And so we're going to have to stay tuned on that. Right now we just have case reports of adverse outcomes from driving under the influence. We're going to have to wait in terms of further data on crime, sexually transmitted diseases. There's clear association, especially among youth, in terms of risky sexual behaviors and marijuana use. And then the final point I want to make too is we've heard a fair amount of talk here about the drug war and the debate about legalization, criminalization, and that kind of thing. And I think it's unfortunate that the medical system, which already has enough problems of its own, has really been wrapped up in the whole issue of legalization of marijuana. We know that from the beginning, many of the supporters of Amendment 20 and medical marijuana legalization were supporters of legalization of marijuana for recreational use. And we know that marijuana is clearly not a medicine in terms of the medical model sense of the word. So we have a lot of case reports of people saying that they've clearly benefited from marijuana. But there's no medical group, reputable mainstream medical group that's calling for medical marijuana. The Food and Drug Administration is not calling for medical marijuana. In fact, they've scheduled it as a Schedule I substance. The Institute of Medicine report that I already referred to in 1999 says that the goal of marijuana research is not to develop marijuana as medicine, but to inform us whether or not we should continue with this line of research in terms of looking at the active ingredients and developing other delivery methods besides smoking, which leads me to my next point in terms of what other medicine do we smoke, and this is also what other medicine are we not sure of the dose or the purity, and we say here take 2 to 100 milligrams 1 to 10 times a day. Okay, so marijuana clearly does not fit the medical model in that sense, and I think it's unfortunate that medicine has been involved in this whole debate. I would encourage another discussion at another time of whether or not we should legalize it, but that's separate from the current discussion of what to do with it medically.